event kind of way anyway. Right, guys. Massive thank you to everyone that has turned out tonight, this morning, wherever you are in the world, for what is the 3rd anniversary of my CPD in VR events. It's amazing to think that it's 3 years now. I've been hosting these free professional development events inside Engage. It's been an amazing journey. Chris and Mike, and obviously the late Chris Long. We've got his image at the back of the space here. Between the 4 of us, we've done some crazy stuff over the last 3 years, and we've had some amazing guests, and we've got an absolutely stellar lineup of events for you today, starting with this exclusive interview with the one and only Jeremy Bailenson. He was top of my list for guests for this 3rd anniversary. There really was only one person that I wanted to be my kind of keynote speaker or my launch event for this anniversary, and that is Mr. Jeremy Bailenson. Jeremy, thank you so much for not only getting out of bed, but just giving up a slice of your precious time to be here with us today.
It's my pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me, and more importantly, thanks for the work that you do and for everything that you guys are accomplishing here.
Thank you, man. So I'm assuming we've got quite a large audience with us, and I think there's more people joining all the time. Mike, I'm just going to shout out to you, and I'm going to say, just to prove anyone at this point, if you've got people knocking on the door, we've got people sitting in an overflow room, and I think we can probably accommodate them in some of the spare seats. So by all means, Mike just approve them all, and we'll see how many we can fit in one space. I would think, Jeremy, that everyone here knows who you are, knows what you do, but we may have some people that have joined us out of curiosity. For those that aren't as familiar with you and your background, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your journey into the world of immersive technology?
Yeah, so my PhD was in the late 1990s, and I was studying cognitive science. My dissertation was building models of how one person would understand an argument between 2 others, doing a bit of experimentation, a bit of natural language processing. And in the late 90s and 99, I loved doing research, and I loved studying the mind, but I just didn't love the field of cog sci. So at the time, I was reading the novel Neuromancer by William Gibson, and I was also a bit disillusioned with the field of cognitive science. And so I took a chance, and I left the field of cog sci, and I found a postdoc at UC Santa Barbara working with Jim Blaskovich and Jack Loomis. And the postdoc was building virtual reality to use as a tool to study the brain. And I luckily was able to get that postdoc, and for 4 years I ran psychology experiments. I was building VR. These systems were 7-figure systems back in the day. Very hard to build room scale tracking back then. And so I learned a bit of engineering, obviously coding on how to build the worlds, and inspire the same reaction as a real person. We did a lot of foundational work to really understand what happens in the moment encounters a virtual space and an avatar. And then in the year 2003, I was lucky enough to get an interview in the Department of Communication at Stanford University. And in the comm department, we study how people use media. And if you believe VR is a medium, which all of us in this room do, but back in 2003, this was not a popular opinion. Stanford showed a lot of foresight and hired this kind of weird dude that was studying the psychology of avatars in VR in 2003. And, I was able somehow to get that job. And then you get to a place like Stanford, and there's so many resources and brilliant students. And for the last 18 years now, we've just been flourishing, and students running amazing experiments. And I could talk a bunch more about my journey, Steve, but I'll pause there because I'd love a chance to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing story, and it's I think it's quite a testament to Stanford, the fact that, as you said, in 2003. They took this shot on this weird dude, as you said, but also on this fledgling technology. And I know, obviously, we've had Tom Furness on here talking about the work he was doing with immersive tech back in the 60s. But really, even in 2003, anything that predates that first Oculus, as you say, you're talking about huge sums of money just to have the kit working.
So in the years between 1999 and 2003, I was a postdoc, and the way when you get an interview to be a professor, typically a school advertises a position and they fly in 3 people to give interviews. And between 99 and 2003, I was getting these interviews based on my record and my CV, based on my older cognitive science research, and schools like Memphis University and Brooklyn College and Temple University and Hawaii Pacific University, great universities. I would show up at these places and they knew me as a cognitive scientist, and I'd present this strange research on this is an avatar, and when you meet it, the brain fires in this way. And I guess a polite way to say it is in about 12 different interviews, I came in second or third, and certainly not first at these other schools, because it was just, they just couldn't see it. I'm very thankful at some point somebody decided to take a chance on what was a strange idea, but now we get to be here and learn about all the work you guys are doing in actual classrooms, and it's just amazing.
So you now, obviously, you are the founding director of Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab, which I think is what you're most well known for. I would say alongside your book, Experience on Demand, which is an absolutely seminal book in my opinion. It's the #1 book that I recommend to anyone who's interested in virtual reality in education. I'm working with a school group right now, and the board of directors all went and read this book and were fascinated by what they could learn about it. Chris, we're getting some feedback from someone.
Yep, we got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
VR problems. So obviously this wasn't your first book that you wrote, Jeremy, but I think the reception to Experience on Demand has been phenomenal. I take it you were happy with the results of the book? Were you happy with the reception of the book?
Really neat to have a tool that I can just give to someone and say, hey, please read chapter 4, because I get, as you do, I get queries all the time from people that want to learn about VR, and it's really nice to have this thing that you can say, please read this, in particular chapters 1, 5, and 9, and after you read that, then we can talk. And it's really nice to have one place where all of your main thoughts are summarized. It's a nice way to make conversations more efficient. So, in terms of reception, the reception has been fantastic, and I'm when you tell me a story that you're helping, school board people better understand how to use this tool, that makes me super happy. So I appreciate that story.
For me, there were so many points, and I've written about this in various blog posts and I've talked about it at various presentations where I've quoted you, and it is kind of weird, They always kind of say, don't meet your heroes. And I've had this experience a couple of times inside Engage now, where I've sat down with the people whose work that I am so invested in. And for me, when I first read Experience on Demand, there were so many points where I was like, I've had that exact experience. Like, just for example, right at the start, when you're talking about putting people on the plank and about how it doesn't matter if you've stood in the room watching somebody on the plank. It's when you go into the plank experience yourself and you have that personal, emotive, visceral experience that you truly appreciate the power of the medium. And it was just, for me, it was just wonderful to see that same kind of experiences that I've been having in classrooms, say back in 2017, and see that validated from someone of your stature and working in the field for so long. Who inspires you, Jeremy? I'm sitting here like fanboying on you a little bit and saying that you inspire me, but who, in terms of virtual reality work, who inspires you?
So I'm inspired by a ton of people. I would say if I'm going to talk about people as kind of mentors of whom I'm in awe, I would probably put Jaron Lanier high on that list. The first time I met Jaron was in '99, and again, having just read about this person and seen him on the covers of magazines, and
yeah,
I like to say that every time I think I've got a really big and new idea that's wild and unbelievable, Jaron had the same idea 20 years ago. So he's a really big thinker and also just a really lovely human being. And it's always nice when the people that we have modeled our academic work on and our other work when they turned out to have good heart. That's always a nice thing.
I have tried to tempt Jaron into a CPD and VR event a couple of times, but I haven't been able to get a response. So maybe you can hook me up. 4th year anniversary, Mike, Chris, next year. Jaron Lanier, you heard it here first. We'll get him. So I wanted to talk, Jeremy, about some of the projects that you've been involved with at the virtual. But I want to check with you first, actually, man. Do you, when you're at work, do you refer to it as the VHIL? Or would you rather I keep saying Virtual Human Interaction Lab?
When I chose the acronym, it was very strategic, and we spent many hours on this in order to get tenure at Stanford. And I've had tenure since 2010, but up until 2010, it was always in doubt, and it's always it's very hard to get tenure at places like this, and every little micro decision is kind of propelled along that path. And when we came up with the acronym, it was really critical to signal that I'm doing virtual work, but it really had to be about human interaction, because you can't study a particular medium. You've got to study a process. You've got to study an active thing people do. Anyway, this was the kind of wisdom of the few people that I labored over this decision with, and consequently I've chosen an acronym that does not roll off the tongue. You can call it VIL, VHIL, whatever suits you. I appreciate you asking.
No, it's fine. I just, it is, as you say, it is quite the lengthy title, but I understand, as someone who works in education, we talk all the time about, if you're working with technology, you keep the focus on the pedagogy, less tech and more learning. So it's very clear that the branding of the lab is very much, although it is about technology, it's about the way that we interact as human beings using this technology. So as I said, I want to talk to you about a few of the projects that you've conducted or been involved with at the VHAL. And then I want to be able to make sure we've got at least 15 minutes or so to open to questions. I know there's a bunch of people in the audience that are probably as excited to be in the same virtual space with you as I am. And I want to make sure that if possible, we can allow everyone to get questions and finish on time. I'm terrible for overrunning on events, but oops, I've stood up. I'm conscious of the fact that we've got 6 or 7 more events straight afterwards. So one of the things that you are really known for with the work that you do at Stanford is your work around the role of VR as a medium for empathy, for fostering empathy. And we've talked before during some of my events about the classic Chris Milk quote about the ultimate empathy machine. I myself refer to it as an empathy agent, because I think that machine implies automation, and I don't think that, and I'm sure that I'm paraphrasing you here from a previous quote I've read, that there is no medium that automatically generates empathy. But you've done some incredible work, not the least of which is the becoming homeless experience, which I think is unfortunately quite relevant right now with the way things are going around the world. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about some of these projects, and then ultimately I want to lead towards talking about the 1,000-cut journey?
Yeah. So thanks for putting up a photo of Fernanda Herrera there. So that is, we can now call her Dr. Herrera. She just graduated a few weeks ago. And in terms of what we know about the mechanisms, the limits, and the opportunities for VR and empathy in terms of rigorous work, Fernanda's done just about, I would say, a lion's share of the great work here. And so thanks for putting a picture of her up, because she's really the lead scholar on a lot of this work. So as you point out, we often get asked this question: does VR cause empathy? And I would never talk to a reporter and say, does the medium of video cause empathy, or does an audio stream cause empathy? The answer clearly is it depends on what you do with it. And I think as a field, myself included, for quite some time we thought about the medium, but really didn't think much about the content. I know that sounds really obvious, but if you take a step back historically, we weren't thinking that way. We would just think, if you put someone in VR and you just kind of throw something that sounds like a good narrative, it's going to cause empathy. But as you know, think about how long it took for film to evolve the art to move. So, sum up some of the work that Fernanda's done is she's done 2 or 3 studies now with large sample size close to 1,000 people in some cases, at least 500 in others. She's also done studies with varied sample sizes, meaning not just college undergrads, but people who have socioeconomic variance, a variance in age, all sorts of different aspects. And you know what Fernanda's found in most of her work is, in general, when you compare VR as a medium to a video stream or the gold standard of empathy 10 years ago, which was something called mental perspective taking. You imagine that you're someone else and you're going through it. In general, virtual reality more behavior change, and we think that behavior change is the mechanism behind it is empathy compared to the other media. And let me say a few things about this. First is, empathy is a word that is used fairly loosely. Whenever I enter a new research area, and for me, about 8 years ago, empathy was a new research area. We always want to, of course, do our due diligence, but when possible, pair with experts. And all of this work we paired with a scholar named Jamil Zaki, Z-A-K-I, who's a professor at Stanford. He's a social neuroscientist, and in my opinion, the best scholar on the planet who studies empathy from a brain science standpoint. And Jamil came in the project, I don't want to say he came in as a VR denier, but he certainly didn't believe that VR was going to magically cause changes to empathy. So he's been a really good check and balance, and also a really just working with an expert that understands the brain science on empathy. So should I talk a little bit about becoming homeless and how we built it and what it does, Steve?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So becoming homeless is based on the psychological work of Lee Ross. Lee Ross, Stanford professor, he's been at it for about 5 decades, and about 4 decades or so, he coined something called the fundamental attribution error. And what the fundamental attribution error states, and Steve, as you point out, very relevant to what we're dealing with today, when something bad happens to me, I always blame the situation. It wasn't my fault, the situational stuff happened. When something bad happens to you, I always blame your character or something internal to you. And all of us do this all the time. When bad things happen to us, it's because of we got a bad break in a situation. When something bad happens to someone else, it's probably because there's something about them, and that's why it happened. It's called the fundamental attribution error. Becoming homeless is a scene we designed in consult with Lee Ross to kind of focus on the situational factors that cause anyone to become homeless, as opposed to the internal things that make them different from the normal person. So it's really about a journey where you learn that life can get in the way. You get fired from your job, you're trying to sell items in your apartment to make rent, you can't, you get evicted, and then you try to sleep in your car, but the police kick you out of your car because it's illegal to sleep in your car in this town, and then you try riding on this bus because you can get sleep for 2.5 hours on the bus because it's a long route, but somebody starts trying to take your stuff. It's a really uncomfortable piece, but it's designed with psychological theory about fundamental attribution error. And of course, we worked with numerous homeless organizations and interviewed many homeless people in order to get the details right. And let me talk about one finding. The two papers I would urge you to read. One is published in 2018 in a journal called PLOS ONE. It's called the long-term effects of empathy. And this is where Fernanda looked. She had 500 subjects, and she looked 2 months after doing the VR treatment and showed not insanely large differences, but still differences 2 months later between a VR experience and other experiences like imagining or watching it in 2D. And the home run behavioral measure she looks at here is, we give you an actual petition, and it was a proposition in the state of California when we ran the study, which is, are you willing to have your personal taxes increased just for affordable housing measures? And she shows a slight difference. So that 2018 paper I recommend for people. I think that's kind of the largest kind of mechanism paper. Something we just presented at a conference a month ago, and the paper is going to come out fairly soon. And this is more about the limits of VR. And I think it's important we talk about the limits. She ran a study with 1,000, I think north of 1,000 people. And because we had such a large sample, we did what we often aren't able to do in VR studies because it's hard to get subjects. We had a control condition. And so in this instance, the pure control condition, people walked in and we just asked them to sign a petition. Are you willing to support affordable housing measures for the homeless, even if it means increasing your personal taxes? And we measured the percentage change. We then had, 800 people go through a couple different VR conditions of becoming homeless and then sign the petition. And what we noticed is, the VR condition was higher than control, but only by 7 or 8 percentage points. We're usually used to seeing about 15 or 20. And one of the theories we've been working on for a long time in the lab that's very relevant to education is coming up with automatic algorithms to use the tracking data from virtual reality. How are they moving their bodies? Where are they looking at certain times? How much are they turning their heads? Are they really engaged, or are they sitting like statues? And we've been showing now in a few papers that this can predict the outcomes of a learning scenario, that you can look at people's body language and their body movements and then predict learning outcomes. In this instance, Steve, in becoming homeless, there's a couple of moments that if you're not turning your head over here, you're not seeing the guy harassing you.
You miss it, yeah.
And if you're not sitting in a certain way, you're not feeling the claustrophobia of that spot. And all of becoming homeless designed with these special moments. And what we did, what we probably won't have time to talk about today is a lot of the work that I've done with training. I use virtual reality to train athletes. It could be the German national soccer team. It could be quarterbacks of American football teams. I formed a company called Striver, and I've done a ton of work using VR to help athletes learn their craft. And one of the things that we see on the practice field is coaches will often say, they'll say someday, we had a really good practice today. I really felt like we practiced well. And that stuck with me. And circling back to becoming homeless, just because you're sticking goggles on your face doesn't mean you're doing VR. VR is active. If you're not doing it in the way it's intended, you're probably not getting it. And so what we did in the study is we binned our subjects into the ones that, quote, did VR right, meaning they turned their heads when they were supposed to and they stood and sat in the right places, versus not. And we had about 400 subjects in each condition. So now to remind you, we had the pure control condition, which just signed the petition, and then we had 400 subjects that did VR the right way, and there were 400 subjects that really weren't trying or engaging in the VR. They were wearing the goggles, but they weren't doing it.
Just facing forwards, yeah.
And those subjects were basically equal to the control condition, and the subjects that were moving in the right ways were massively different. So this is the first data set that I think people talked about that I'm really excited to publish, and it was presented at a small conference, so I'm not scooping for Nan. If you're not doing VR the right way, simply putting goggles on your head is not going to magically solve any problems. And that may sound obvious to the people in this room that are actually doing the work. But most people, they kind of think that if you stick this goggles on, there's going to be this magical presence and that's going to solve everything. No, VR, you got to do the work.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I understand the point. I mean, even at a simpler level, you see the same sort of thing. Like, I could have a really powerful documentary film in 2D that I show to a group of children in a classroom. But if 10% of those kids aren't really focused on, listening to the narrator or, following along, or they're messing around, they're not going to, that piece is not going to have the same impact as those that engage with it. And I think that magnifies once you're inside, as you said, a 360 space where it's very easy to miss the key moments. I've been in multiple VR experiences, both entertainment ones and educational ones, where you have that moment where you're like, I think I just missed something. Did something like a sound cue's happened, but I haven't seen anything. So something's obviously happened behind me. Quite often I'll be in these events and Chris Madsen's like puppeting dinosaurs or something behind me, and I don't know until I watch the videos back. So I do warn you about that, Jeremy. If when you watch the recording back of this, if there's sort of dragons or fairies or something behind you, that's Madsen's fault. But I remember back when the forgive my ignorance and my memory, but I remember back when the race riots were kicking off in America. I remember there was a lot of talk around, the talk started to swirl around this project at Stanford that was looking at using virtual reality to combat racism. The headlines were, those kind of clickbait headlines like, can virtual reality cure racism? And I think that eventually morphed into, or the project that this was referred to was the project that's now known as the 1,000 Cut Journey, which you were involved with. I believe, if memory serves, you're credited as the writer of it.
Yeah, so this is a collaboration. The lead on this project is a professor at Columbia. Her name is Courtney Cogburn. And Courtney Cogburn studies racism and health predominantly. She studies the way that issues around race cause all sorts of downstream health effects to humans, and a really accomplished scholar who focuses her day job all day long studying and innovating generally on issues of race. And about 3 years ago, we came together with a grant sponsored by the Brown Institute, and we began working together. And it's really critical that Courtney is the lead on this. I'm thrilled to be a tech contributor, and she and I, of course, collaborate and work on this. We meet weekly, maybe twice a week on it. But it's important to highlight Courtney as the lead here.
Yeah.
1,000 Cut Journey is it's a piece where you become Michael Sterling. Michael Sterling is a black male. We do what's called body transfer, which is you become this avatar, and you feels as if you're the one that's embodied in Michael Sterling. And what we wanted to do, Courtney's vision here was, we don't want to just show the user that racial bias is something that happens every once in a while. We wanted to show that it was consistent across your lifetime. And so in the first scene, you become an elementary school child, and you get punished for doing something that another student did, and the teacher starts screaming at you, the kids ostracize you, and you're sitting down on the floor cross-legged, and just taking abuse both from the other children and the teacher. And then in the next scene, you become a teenager, and you're on your way to a basketball game, and the police stop you. They force you to get on your knees and raise up your hands and search you and scream at you while they don't to your friend who was white, who was going to the basketball game. And in the third scene, you're an adult now, and you are going to an interview, and the person who's interviewing you doesn't even see you, can't notice you, doesn't look at you. You don't even exist in the room while he mistakes another person for the applicant, and of course you don't get that job. And so this was a piece that premiered at 2018 at the Tribeca Film Festival, and since that's happened, I want to talk about three streams of work really. One is so those of you that don't know, Becoming Homeless, it's free online. Anybody can go to my lab's website, download an exe file. Please take it, enjoy it. We share that with the world. 1,000 Cut Journey we didn't share with the world for two reasons. One is this is not an experience that you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be done in a context where you're discussing, anti-Black racism in a way that's productive. You need to be onboarded, prepared for what's going to be happen, and offboarded where you have a thoughtful conversation about what just occurred and things to take home from it. So that's one reason. The second reason is it takes a while to get something from just so you premiere at a film festival to getting what we like to call turnkey, which is it works every time, it works in every platform. And since we premiered at Tribeca, we've got a couple nice grants, one from the Hearst Foundation, thank you Hearst Foundation, and more from the Brown Institute, where we are making a souped up version of this from a technological standpoint, where the graphics are much better, and it's going to be turnkey. We're working with a company called Ink Stories on that, where they're helping us. The second thing is we want to be very careful to understand that the psychological outcomes are that this is going to be a helpful tool. For those that have read Chapter 3 of Experience on Demand, and by the way, anyone in this room, if you send me an email, I'll send you a PDF. I'm thrilled that people will read it, but I don't need to sell copies. I'm happy to share a PDF with you. Chapter 3, I talk about a study that we ran in 2009 where we had white subjects wear black-skinned bodies in avatars, and showed that their implicit bias actually increased when they wore those black bodies. We could talk about the reasons for that if that's important, but the bottom line is that VR is a powerful tool. We all know that in this room, and you can't just assume that your vision of putting someone in a body is going to cause them to become less biased in how they behave later on. Now, since that early study in 2009, a lot of great work done from Mel Slater's group by Tabitha Peck and other scholars have shown that these types of simulations reduce bias. Courtney Cogburn at Columbia, as she is, she convinced Columbia to make Thousand Cut Journey a part of the required curriculum for all incoming graduate students. And I can't talk about the results because we're about to submit the paper, but she's got an amazing longitudinal over years study where she has for some subjects VR training embedded in an actual class, and for others not, and is going to compare the two. And so this is an amazingly rigorous study she ran, and so we didn't want to distribute this before having some good confirmation about those results. And again, I can't talk about those results yet,
Sure.
But you can have Courtney on, and she'll be, I'm sure, thrilled to talk about them at some point, or the paper will be out. But the third thing that we've done is, what we have done in small doses is bring VR into organizations. So we brought VR. For example, Courtney and Tobin from brought VR to show the CEO and the entire C-suite of PricewaterhouseCoopers. The result of that was that, I don't know if you guys have been following the kind of which companies are pursuing VR for diversity training, but PricewaterhouseCoopers just announced their own huge initiative, and that all began with Courtney showing the CEO Thousand Cut Journey, and there's been a ton of, I could a dozen examples of just kind of people being introduced to VR by not just Thousand Cut Journey, but Courtney's conversation about it, and that causing all sorts of institutional changes. And what you're going to be seeing in the next 4 or 5 months is a lot more announcements of large-scale VR deployments in these areas. So it's important work, and I'm glad to be working with Courtney on it.
Definitely, and yeah, definitely seeing PwC leading the way. I mean, I've had Jeremy Dalton from PwC UK on my show before, and he's been doing some amazing stuff over in the UK. Even the PwC team here in Dubai have their a VR wing now, and I don't think there's many other companies at that level that have been that forward thinking. Just moving on, because I'm conscious of time. We've passed the halfway mark already. Another field that you've really done a lot of work in at the lab is around ecology and environmentalism. You can see obviously the two images here. We've got Stanford Ocean here you go for your long titles again, Jeremy. The Stanford Ocean Acidification Experience, and then the slightly more palatable Coral Compass. Two projects which the Virtual Human Interaction Lab are involved with, and two projects both with a similar theme around environmentalism and protecting the environment. Is this something that you yourself are passionate about? Is this something these projects that you have spearheaded, or are these projects that other members of your team have led?
So whenever we build a piece, the piece has to be, there's got to be 4 or 5 people that are going to be willing to be passionate about it for a good year at a time. So definitely the students and staff, as well as my interests aligned with climate change. The Stanford Ocean Acidification Experience, which has a horrible acronym that doesn't even match, we call it SOA for some reason, even though that doesn't actually work out phonetically. That premiered at the 2016 Tribeca Film Festival, and that's based on the research of Theo McKelly. She's a marine scientist that shows how carbon dioxide affects the future of the oceans. And what I'll say about SOA, the Ocean Acidification Experience, it's now been downloaded in over half the planet in terms of over 102 installed it. Hundreds of thousands of users at this point. This is also free online, so anyone that doesn't have it, please download it. And now we're about to write a study again. We're trying to run these large-scale studies with thousands of subjects going through it, and we're quite confident, if nothing else, this has caused many people to be aware of something called ocean acidification. Most smart people don't know what that is. It's just not something that's on their radar. So in terms of raising awareness, I'm confident that this piece has done that at the scale of hundreds of thousands, and it's really neat to see.
And
Coral
Coral,
Compass.
Coral Compass? This is a
Coral
more recent
Compass, I've
piece.
got Coral Compass is, so SOA is a CG 360 video, room scale, active. You're doing stuff. It's constructivist learning. We love it. It's the gold standard in my mind for for 2016 graphics. So you'll have to excuse them when you go through of how to kind of really think through making the learner do stuff in a smart way. Coral Compass was very opportunistic. So a marine scientist named Rob Dunbar, he runs something called Stanford at Sea. And it's a class where you go on for 2 weeks. And Rob, who's this brilliant marine scientist, he just takes you through and takes you to, we were in Palau. Palau is an island nation in Micronesia, a network of islands where the coral is in some ways jeopardized by climate change, but a subset of it is doing well and robust, and it's kind of a mystery for scientists. And we tagged along, myself, Tobin Asher, and Elise Ogle. We tagged along on this boat. I was only able to spare 3 days, but Tobin and Elise stayed for 2 weeks. And every day we went diving, free diving, with an underwater 360 camera, and we kind of caught before and after spots. And Coral Compass is also free to download, and I urge everyone to download it. We caught this moment. We went to this beautiful spot called Soft Coral Arch, and I think we got there very early, like 6:30 a.m. And it's this pristine arch where all the flowery soft coral is everywhere, and it's one of the nicest spots you'll dive. It's just gorgeous. And then at 7:30 a.m., the first boat of tourists came, and this swarm of people that didn't even know how to swing, they were clinging onto these rafts. They had fins. We just watched probably about 30 or 40 people float through this very small arch and watch their fins just destroy and dislodge and knock all this coral off. And so it was this horrible thing, but we were there to capture it on 360. And Tobin and Elise pulled an all-nighter 2 nights in a row because we actually had a meeting with all the Palauan senators and House delegates, which is all of their lawmakers, 2 days later, and we had the opportunity to put the lawmakers, put the HTC Vive on these lawmakers and have them experience their reefs getting destroyed in VR, and told them this just happened 2 days ago. And what it led to, as you guys likely know, in whatever country you're from, lawmakers don't always have the experiences they need to guide the laws. They talk about it in the abstract, but they're not there. This led to, first of all, Palau has an amazing policy towards their oceans. They're very forward-thinking in general, but this led to a very specific change about how they train tourists and what they allow tourists to do. So this VR experience caused a very micro change as it relates to local climate policy.
That's absolutely amazing. I did actually have the trailer for Coral Compass lined up to show you, but guys, I'm really conscious of time. There's a couple of more questions that I wanted to ask Jeremy before I open up the floor to questions from the audience. Chris Madsen, I just got to say, man, I'm hearing this every few minutes. I hear this random clap from over here. Is that you?
It's gone.
Okay. I just wondered if it was just me, because I'm hearing it spatially. So, Jeremy, I just wanted to just quickly ask you one question about this. This is the Common Sense Media Virtual Reality 101 report from 2018, which you wrote that you were involved with. You wrote the foreword to. This was something that I found a little bit contentious, and I wrote a lengthy kind of response to this on my website just after it was published. I ended up going backwards and forwards with Jim at Common Sense Media about the validity of the data that they collected. But I think ultimately, you're here now in a room full of educators looking to harness VR. There is increased accessibility to the hardware now. There is increased opportunity for schools to start to integrate virtual reality in the classrooms. There are obviously pitfalls. There are dangers that educators need to be aware of, that parents will be concerned about. What would your advice be to a room full of educators looking to harness virtual reality? What would be your professional advice from with all those years of experience at the Stanford lab? What would you say to us?
Yeah. So I don't know what part you found contentious, but I think the overall message, and we tried to be, I thought, thoughtful and careful and not alarmist in how we summarize our recommendations. The biggest thing, the thing that's going to save you all sorts of headaches, in my opinion, is just keep to this 20-minute rule. Like, I know for those of you who are wearing helmets right now, who are wearing goggles, you're now on minute 40, and I don't think kids need to be in VR in a classroom for more than 20 minutes at a time, and I know they can, but it just, I have to see application where that makes sense. Now, I understand why Engage is different because it's collaborative and talking and doing stuff, and I see that's not just a static piece, but I still think when you're doing this stuff at scale, in my lab, if you've got an experience that's 40 minutes long, you say, you know what, take a break at 20, have a sip of water, go touch a wall, and just be reminded that the world is out there. And so I still do stand by that at scale, and I think that's probably going to solve more problems than it would cause later on. But that's kind of the main role. I also think the notion that things done in VR are a bit different than things watched on TV because it's active and doing. And so I still think we need to be careful about types of content that we do, both as adults and as kids. And I know that's not at all relevant to the educators in this room. But when you're doing a first-person shooter in VR, the feeling of doing it is a little different than just kind of hitting a button on a game.
Sure, definitely. Just to clarify, when I said that I found that the data a little bit contentious, for me, what stood out was the fact that was the data that where parents had been surveyed about, they were being asked questions about whether they saw VR as a good way to spend time as a family. And for me, because it's an experiential technology, my question to Jim, in a sense, was how many of the parents that were surveyed had actually tried VR? I know they're the parents of children who have tried VR, but how many of those parents have actually tried VR? Because if you asked me, is the circus a good way to spend time as a family, and I'd never been to the circus, I couldn't really answer that because I have no frame of reference in terms of what going to the circus is like. That was what it wasn't a sort of, as I say, it wasn't a negative conversation I had with him, but it just, what worried me was the headlines, not from the report, but the headlines in the press that, of course, jumped on it as parents are terrified of virtual reality, or virtual reality is coming for your children. I thought was quite interesting was in the foreword you mentioned about Jackie Bailey. Am I right? Jackie Bailey?
Yeah.
Excuse me, the name's on. There's reference to Jackie putting hundreds of kids into VR experiences. I think it's the Sesame Street one that it's referring to, and having no ill effects off the back of it. Obviously, one of the other common questions that I get asked, and I know a lot of the other people in the room probably get asked, is, what's the minimum age? In your opinion, what is the youngest age that somebody should be putting on a headset, a 6-DoF headset, let's say?
Yeah, so I have a 6 and a 9-year-old, and they each go in. I'd say they probably spent a total of 1 hour of their lives in VR each. I put them in, I let them stand for 4 or 5 minutes, and then I shoot them out of there. I mean, but part of that is I haven't had time to figure out my VR content strategy for the kids. So a number of people at Engage have been really helpful to me. I want to talk a little bit about the study we're running now, because I think it relates to your critique, and I think a worthy critique of the way that Common Sense surveyed the parents. So when COVID hit, I went to my computer and was trying to find curricula in VR that I could augment the kind of limited homeschooling stuff that the schools were offering now that our schools were closed, and I wasn't finding anything. And so we decided, we have a qualitative scholar, her name is Madsen in my lab, and Madsen, she wanted to run a large-scale study, and Geraldine Fauville, they wanted to run a study, how are parents using VR in this crisis, and in a way that I think is a great way to do a type of study. And again, this was with help from you guys.
Yeah, I contributed to that. Geraldine reached out to me, and I did actually feed into that. Although I did say to her, I think that maybe my data might skew the average. But
yeah.
Go on. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, please, if time is up, we can pause if time is up.
No, you're fine.
Okay. For this study, we wanted to do it right, and we wanted to survey lots and lots of parents and survey them multiple times, and then also get them on the phone and do it with them. And so kind of really being thorough. And we ended up data set to 1,000 people in our large survey, a couple hundred and longitudinal survey where they do it 4 or 5 times, and then these just amazing in-depth interviews that we're now mining for the data, just to get a sense of what do parents know about VR, what do they understand. And I don't have results for you yet, but the second I do, we'll give you an early look at that, given how you helped us out in this, and again, we really appreciate that.
I've lost audio, Mike. Chris.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He's not muted.
Okay.
I don't know what just happened.
Oh,
there he
you're
is.
back. Yeah.
When did I cut off? Hello?
Yeah.
Just a few seconds.
Okay. So what's my ultimate recommendation for the teachers in this room, which is, be thoughtful about which content you're doing. Start off in small bursts, and I just a little bit of VR goes a long way. And if you think about how hard it is to do a real field trip, just a handful of VR field trips would be awesome, right? I mean, this technology can make a huge difference in the classroom, even if you're not doing it every single day. Just beaming them in and letting us do stuff we wouldn't do otherwise.
So you mentioned COVID there. So just the very last thing I just wanted to ask you, obviously I'd say it's the elephant in the room, but it's kind of unfortunately, it's the invisible elephant in a lot of rooms right now. The COVID pandemic has obviously changed the world like never before. And obviously there's been some terrible things happening all across the world, but within the VR industry, it almost seems like the knock-on effect of the pandemic and the closures and the lockdowns is potentially the immersive tech field is having a little bit of a supercharge. It seems to be, from Oculus Quest selling out very early to now there's, as you mentioned before about PwC, but there's a lot more companies that seem to be looking at the potential of VR as a medium. I just wanted to finish off just by asking your thoughts on the future of VR and potentially how you see what's happened here with us in 2020 impacting the timeline, so to speak.
Yeah, so the timing to me was a bit of a bummer because supply chain wise, a lot of HMDs delivered in a couple critical moments because of the supply chain from Asia early on. And I think that little hiccup magnified itself. I mean, with my company Striver, we trained 1 million Walmart employees last year in VR, and our pipeline to goggles, the companies we're working with now are some of the companies that are hiring. For example, Walmart, FedEx, Verizon, these are companies that are just doing really, really well. They're actually doing better in COVID than they would before. And so we've had to figure out how do we get them HMDs? How do we allow them to share HMDs in a way that's clean with hygiene, which is a very solvable problem, but one you have to pay attention to. And sure. I've seen personally a bit of a conundrum where there's a narrative that VR is what we need to get us through COVID, but in practice, I can give you 2 anecdotal examples here, and they're both kind of bummers, and I don't want to end on a bummer, but
we'll take questions from the audience, so it'll be fine.
Okay, IEEE VR, the biggest academic conference around VR, they decide early March that their late March conference is going to be inside VR, and it's a conference 3 or 4 days, and you can watch it using HMDs inside Mozilla Hubs, or you can use Zoom or Twitch. And I would say less than a quarter of people decided to go into immersive VR, and I'm probably being very generous with that number. And these are VR geeks like me that have 4 or 5 different HMDs at home. So, given the option of using HMDs, people chose Zoom, and it was a kind of a quandary. It's a strange data point that kind of, I would have loved for that moment to be all of us in VR, but I also chose Zoom because after a few minutes on the goggles, it was, if I'm just going to see a PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to save myself that helmet head for now.
Sure.
The other data point is this year, the piece I premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, my team and I, is called Virtual Becomes Reality, VBR. And Virtual Becomes Reality, for those of you in this room, and I know Caitlin was there, I saw it, and others, I've physically been to my lab. I give a hour-long Jeremy lab tour where I take you through all these demos and the history of it. And what we built is a 15-minute self-contained journey where the scene starts in my lab, but you walk the plank and you fly like Superman, and you go to Palau and see the coral, and you become a National Football League quarterback, and you go to the virtual mirror and have your skin color change and experience bias. It's this very boom, boom, quick, rapid fire. Get all the demos from my lab, learn the science behind it. It's a piece I'm very proud of, and I can't wait to share with the world for free. But the Tribeca Festival, the deadline for its premiere, which was in June, I was trying to get colleagues to be able to test VBR to give me feedback on it. And in order to run VBR, you've got to have room scale VR that's tethered to a PC, because it's got a hologram of me, a volumetric hologram. It's a really, it takes a lot of processing. And of all my VR colleagues, the amount of people that had a really good gaming laptop at home, the space to do room scale VR, and either the HTC product or the Rift S or the Valve Index or one of these kind of PC, 18 degree of freedom VR, was a very small subset. So I think VR is getting very large in the narrative, but this idea that everyone's got it at home, the Quest is gaining some traction, but the Quest is not going to be a solution for people that want to use their own content that's not mediated by Facebook, and so I don't think the Quest is kind of a solution for VR as a field. So I'm very optimistic, and it's the world is so much better for VR now than it was in '99, and so much better than it was 5 years ago. But I think
it's not there yet. Yeah, it's not there yet. I do agree. I refer to it as it's like a Marty McFly moment for VR right now. Everyone wishes that everyone in the world was ready for it, but it's more like your kids are going to love it. 5 years, 10 years down the line, if this sort of thing had happened, we might be looking at the technology that we're using to communicate and connect with each other a little bit differently. But right now, because access and hardware is not readily available in every home, it's just not. It's not quite there. I am really conscious of time now, Jeremy. I've got less than 10 minutes. I promised myself I wouldn't overrun. And I'm sure there's some people in the audience that are dying to ask you a question or two. We've got a big group with us. Chris, Madsen, can I ask you to... So about 10 people unmuted at once there. Chris, can I ask you to be my my glamorous co-host? And
you bet. I've got everybody can unmute themselves at this stage. If they need to say something, they can unmute themselves.
Fantastic. The only problem, Chris, is from here, right? Because we've got this lovely, great new space. By the way, huge shout out to Engage.
David down here has a question.
Great space that we've got for this session, but I can't read the names from here, Chris.
Yeah, you bet. So raise the hand, and if you are on a PC, you can now raise your hand as well. Looks like Kwaku's got a question over here.
Kwaku, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
I'm good. Can you hear me?
You can, man, yeah.
Jeremy, going back to the education piece that the two of you were discussing, can you talk about thoughts on using VR with students under the age of 13? I totally relate and agree and utilize the 20-minute rule that you described. And one of the challenges that I have in working in schools is determining at what age is it appropriate developmentally for a student to be in a headset.
Yeah. So when most of the companies, I didn't talk much with Sony, but Google, definitely Facebook, and Samsung, when they were coming up with their age limits, I had a lot of conversations with the people whose job it was to set the age limits for products. Being a professor at Stanford, I'm in the Valley, and I talk a lot with these companies. And what I will say to you is that I'm fairly certain that for just about all the companies, again, I have no window into Sony, the decision about the age was less based on worrying about visual fatigue, eye damage, simulator sickness, and more about other downstream effects about, For Facebook, it was you're using a social network because they wanted to be tied to your Facebook account, and it had to be linked to the rules about having a social media account. Samsung, different reasons as it is to the phone. I will say to you, and I realize now this is the question, the one question Steve had brought up that I wanted to monologue over and didn't get to. I'm now.
You broke up there, Jeremy. Sorry.
I'm now working with Gordon Wetstein, who's a vision scientist and mechanical engineer at Stanford, to really start to understand. There's this narrative that, you know, the eyes are going to get fatigued when you use VR for too long because of the mismatch between what's called vergence, when your eyes move closer to one another, and accommodation, when each eye focuses independently. I won't go into details, but we're looking into this really. We're going to run a very large-scale longitudinal study about when visual fatigue occurs with VR. But there's a narrative that companies made the decision based on worries to the visual system, and I just simply don't think that's true, and there's not a ton of data on it. So I personally, and this is, I don't have large, so Jackie Bailey ran hundreds of kids, and this work was by Sesame Workshop. And you know, when she ran the studies, we had two rules. One is parents had to be present. 3 rules. Parents had to be present. No kid wore those goggles for more than 8 minutes. And the content was Grover and Elmo doing really pro-social things in VR. And I'm very confident if you stick to those 3 kind of buckets, meaning you're very comfortable with the content, you're running, you know, for 5-ish minutes. Teacher, they really care about their demographic. Their demographic, they have a show called Sesame Street, is basically 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So we started the study. Our first phase was looking at 6 and 7-year-olds just to be safe. And as part of the funding, they really wanted to run a pilot study with even 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And we had no problems. We absolutely had no problems, but we kept it short. We had the parents there, and I was there keeping them safe so they wouldn't hit walls. So with supervision, tiny doses is okay. And sorry, that was long-winded.
No worries, no worries. We've got some more questions. Chris, I can't see.
We have
see names.
David here. David, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
David?
Hi. I got a question about 2D access to VR. With all the constraints currently facing access to VR, whether it be cost or supply chain, what have you, is much attention being given to trying to alleviate some of those by 2D access to VR?
I think, you know, right now I'm 2D right now, and the reason I'm 2D is that when I'm speaking, I really I'm not as good in VR as I am researching VR. So if I have to focus on the hand controllers and the goggles, I won't speak as well. So I'm feeling pretty high presence from you guys right now, and in my research, I would say about 1/3 of my studies I've looked at 2D VR, and it's got a time and a place. I've always felt that if head movements are an important portion of it, if you're not moving your head around a lot, then, or your hands, then 2D VR has a time and a place. And there's a company that I don't work for, but I just discovered called Equal Reality, and they've made a really neat. There's a free demo online where you can basically do body transfer using your mouse in front of a mirror. It looks pretty neat. Well, you can check it out. I thought they were pretty clever and creative when they did that.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a look. You can find it on Viveport, David. It'll work on your Vive Focus. It's something. If you, I think I wrote about it in about 2018, and I spoke to one of the guys that was involved in that project. It never quite fully developed as much as they were planning. They were talking about. I think the version I tried, Jeremy, was where you were in a wheelchair, but they were going to do one where you change your age, you change your sex, you changed your race, you changed the various, you changed your sexual orientation. There was going to be lots of different variations on it. But I don't know if the project ever went past that initial beta kind of stage. Right now, guys, listen, I am conscious of the fact that the next event is about to begin. I don't know, is Stephen Sato in here, Chris?
He's not. He's in the overflow room running that.
Of course he is. Stephen, if you're listening to the live stream, I'm really sorry if I've knocked on into your event. I think it's Stephen next. It might be Daniel.
Yes.
Pretty sure it's Stephen. So if you are booked to join Stephen Sato's session that he's about to host, the second of the 8 sessions that we're hosting today for the CPD and VR 3rd anniversary, then please by all means do jump across to that. I'm sure there's probably a couple of people that are still desperate to ask Jeremy a question. Jeremy, if you're all right just to stay on just for a few minutes more and answer just a couple more questions, that'd be amazing.
I'd be thrilled to do so.
Thank you so much.
We have Caitlin over here.
All right, unmuting myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. Thanks so much for this amazing talk. I'm Caitlin Krause. I've worked with Elise Ogle on projects at Limbics and also came into the lab. So just really wonderful hearing the whole backstory and all the stories leading up. And my question for Jeremy this morning is just thinking about the virtual human interaction lab. Have you been doing some research on people going in as individuals into experiences, and then also maybe some social experiences to see what people experience together when they're inside of VR in a social environment of co-presence? Really curious.
Yeah, so thanks for that, and thanks for your help with Elise
Sure.
at Limbics and coming to the lab. I would say about a third of our study, maybe a quarter of our studies involve some use of networked VR, and some of it I like to call kind of the nuts and bolt work where, you know, Fernanda and Catherine O, they just published a study that looked at the difference between having floating hands and inverse kinematics on the elbows in terms of how much people gesture and how connected they get in terms of nonverbal synchrony. So we do a lot of work on that kind of nuts and bolts of the engineering decisions and how they affect outcomes. On the more social side, we do a lot of fun studies with avatars that look at how individuals can transform to have group outcomes. So Catherine O, one of her neat studies is we were using 2D VR, but we were using, I don't know if you remember the phase shift algorithm. Phase shift got bought by Apple and became in iOS 10, their avatar powered. Catherine ran a very clever study where she had 2 people networked, each using the phase shift algorithm to track their face, and they saw each other as avatar faces. So if you can imagine that, one person sitting on a laptop seeing the other person's face, and they had avatars, and we're tracking their face movements in real time because we had the early phase shift algorithm before it was bought by Apple. And she put a gain factor on smiles, meaning she increased the value of the parameter of the edges of your mouth as it was tracked. So if you 20% smile, your avatar would do a 40% smile. And so she put a gain factor on both people's smiles, and they just had a conversation. The conversation was kind of a business school, get to know you type thing, lasted for about 40 minutes. And what she measured was 2 things. One is she recorded all of your voices and then used linguistic analysis to see how positive you spoke. And then she looked at a standard measure of how happy you were using the PANS scale. And when you increase the gain factor of smiles in an avatar conversation, people speak more positively and they report feeling better after the conversation. And this is, nobody knows that the gain factor is there. It's subtle enough that you don't notice it. But this is an example of taking an individual, putting it into the group, and then changing the norm of the group.
It's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. And guys, don't,
Sure thing.
if you have not booked to join Caitlin's session later on with the grandfather of VR, Tom Furness, they're going to be looking at how wonder can be manifested using virtual reality. That'll be a session not to be missed. Guys, I am conscious of time. I don't want to be holding people away from Stephen's session. He's given up his time to host one of these events for me. Plus, I've only got about 45 minutes before I need to open up the next, because I'm hosting an episode of my chat show in a little under an hour. I want to just say an absolutely massive thank you to the man himself, Jeremy Bailenson. It's been an honor, and it's been truly fascinating and a genuine privilege to get to sit virtually with you. And I honestly hope that one day we do get to sit down in the real world like this and chat about all things virtual reality and more. But huge thank you, Jeremy, for giving up some of your time for us today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone else's time. I appreciate your due diligence and your questions. Thanks for the great questions. And for those in the audience that don't know, if you send me an email with a question, I tip bailenson@gmail.com.
All right, guys. Thank you all so much. We're going to close this session down now. Do jump into Stephen's session if you're eager for more. I'll be back in about 45 minutes with an episode of Live from Dubai. We've got sessions with Caitlin Krause, joined by Tom Furness later on. We've got another Stanford session. Mr. Madsen over here is hosting a session. Who is it, Jeremy, you've got from Stanford?
Matt Hassel. They brought their dice lab into virtual reality. They're going to show that off.
So you're going to get to see the actual the virtualization of Stanford's dissection lab during that session, and we're rounding off the event at the very end. Chris, Mike, who's around somewhere, is the lead developer on Engage, and Dave Whitten, the CEO of Massive VR Education. We're all going to sit down for a little bit of a decompress and chat about the last 3 years and how far both the events that I've been hosting have come and the Engage platform as a whole has come. And a huge thank you again to Chris and Mike and everyone, Carlos and his film crew team, for making everything happen during this session and the subsequent sessions. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay indoors if you need to. And I'll see you real soon.
Cheers.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, guys. Great job.